I've put a link in the chat for everyone. This is a super quick feedback form for the end. I'll remind everyone as we get to the end of the session to fill that in. It also includes an option to be added to a mailing list so that if you want to be informed about other opportunities for prospective applicants, then I can keep your details and share things like the recording of the session afterwards with you. So if you could fill that in at the end, I'll leave 10 minutes at the end of the session for you to do that. That would be great. Captions should be enabled for anybody who needs those. Should be an option somewhere at the bottom of the screen. As I said already, microphones and cameras should automatically be turned off for all attendees, and we have a selection of panelists here who you should be able to mostly see. So we've got a whole bunch of panelists who I'll introduce in a second, and we also have our Panorama DTP director, Sebastian, and manager, Nigel, and they'll be squirreling away in the background answering all of your questions as you think of them. And if you could pop those questions in the question and answer function at the bottom of your screen, that would be great. It's a really streamlined way of everyone being able to answer your questions. We'll answer some of them live, and if you'd like to address them to the panel, then just put panel in front, and if not, then we can delegate them ourselves, and they can either be answered by Sebastian and Nigel or by one of the panelists. We also have Heather, who is another Equality, Diversity, Inclusion officer for a different funding programme, and she's just sitting in to help me with stuff in the background. So she won't necessarily be participating, but she's just there, and hope that's okay for everyone. And the last thing to say for panelists, if you guys are keen beans and have lots of things to say, if you could use the raise your hand function at the bottom so that I can make sure that I get to whoever said first, sort of thing, and just manage the conversation like that. Cool. I think that's all the housekeeping things that I wanted to say. So if we could just go around the panelists and introduce ourselves. If you could say your name, the year that you're in the Panorama DTP, and maybe a little bit about your project so that all the attendees can get a feel for the different sorts of things that you can study as a PhD student in the DTP. Now, last time I did this alphabetically, so we'll start with, if I've got it right, Amethyst, you're first, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you for that. So my name's Amethyst. I'm a third year now. So I started my PhD in 2020, and I work on basically the forecasting of tropical cyclones, and in particular the lowest 2 kilometers or so.
Great, thank you. And then we'll go on to Ed, that's next in the alphabet.
Yeah, hello, my name's Ed. I am a second year PhD student with the Panorama DTP at the University of Hull. My project is looking at molecular markers associated with environmental adaptability in lizards.
Super, thank you. And then Eva.
Hi, I'm Eva. I hope you can hear me all. Perfect. I'm now a third year PhD student as well. I use radar satellite data to look at volcanoes, look at how they form and like topographic changes. And specifically, I look at a volcano in Indonesia. So yeah, this is what I'm doing.
Great, thank you. And then Jenny.
Yeah, hi, I'm Jenny. I'm at University of Leeds in the biology school, and I'm studying ecological drivers of evolutionary adaptation in seals with the backdrop of environmental change. And I'm a first year.
Great. And Olufemi, if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I am Olufemi, and I'm second year PhD. I am also part of the 2021 Panorama DTP. I am into social science research, and I am studying innovation decision-making processes and drivers of change among smallholder farmers in sub-Saharan Africa. Thanks.
Great. And last but not least, Thomas.
Hi, I'm Thomas. I'm first year of my PhD based over in Wackle in York. and I'm looking at mobile measurements of methane, so using aircraft and a van to be able to go around and measure methane emissions in the UK.
Super. Right, now that everybody's introduced and all the attendees can see we've got a huge variety of different disciplines covered under the Panorama DTP, I thought it would just be useful for me to give a really quick little presentation that gives everyone an idea of what a DTP actually is, for those of you who've joined and are maybe interested in a PhD but have absolutely no idea about the different funding mechanisms and what our funding is about and what our program is about. So I won't spend too long on that, but just thought that would be useful for everyone. And for all the attendees, if you think of any questions at all, whether when I'm giving the presentation or anything pops to your head, just use that Q&A function and we'll go through and answer those later. And I've also got some pre-prepared questions as well for the panel to kickstart everything once I've finished talking. So I'll just get started with that. Cool. Hopefully everybody can see that. So yeah, we are the NERC Panorama DTP. We are a PhD funding program that is based at the University of Leeds, but we also have partners with the University of York and the University of Hull. And I'm just going to give a little overview of what that means and what it's like to do a PhD with us and what you get out of that. So for those of you who, as I said, are interested in a PhD or interested in research, but don't really know what that means or where to start, you can get funded to do a PhD in various ways. So you can self-fund, you can get university-specific scholarships, or you can join a doctoral training partnership or a Centre of Doctoral Training, which is called a CDT. These last two options are quite similar. And as it sort of says in the name, a DTP, a doctoral training partnership, involves cohort-based training as opposed to you just kind of doing things more on your own within your specific research group. DTPs are partnerships between different universities and companies or charities or any other kind of external industry partners. And they offer fully funded PhDs. So that includes what's known as your stipend, which is your tax-free grant to cover living costs. And that's at a set rate. It covers your training and it covers any university fees that you might need to pay. So we cover all of those things financially. We are funded by the UKRI, which is UK Research Innovation. So they're this really big umbrella company, organisation really, who encompass all of the individual research councils underneath them who have different remits for different subjects. So these are all the logos for the different research councils that offer doctoral training partnerships. And we are all about the science of the environment. So we are funded by the Natural Environment Research Council, which is the logo on the top left there. And that's where we get our funding, but we are still governed by the UKRI as a whole. So as I've sort of covered, we are funded by the Natural Environment Research Council, and our specific DTP is called Panorama. And all of our projects have some link to the environment. And now, as you heard from our panelists introducing themselves, that can be really, really broad, and it can kind of mean anything. We take mathematicians, we take social scientists, we take geologists, and our research basically covers three broad themes: atmosphere and climate, living world, and earth processes. And just to reiterate, we're mainly based in Leeds, and that's where most of our students will study, but we also have students at the University of York in the atmospheric chemistry labs and at the University of Hull in the Institute of Energy and Environment. As I sort of just mentioned, we have the three university partners here. Within those partners, we have different departments. I've already mentioned the Atmospheric Lab and York and the Energy and Environment Institute in Hull. At Leeds, we have the Earth and Environment School. We have school biology, chemistry, civil engineering, geography, and maths. So we'll have students in all of these departments and supervisors as well. the Earth and Environment School is highlighted in red because that's where the management staff, so myself and the Panorama manager and director are all based. So we're kind of hosted through that school, though we recruit everyone in all of these other disciplines as well. So as I mentioned, DTPs are not just about having links with universities. We also have external or industrial partners. Here is a whole subsection of those partners. It's not an exhaustive list, but if you have a project that is marked case, so you'll see on our website some of our available projects for this year will have case next to them. That means that they already have existing partnership with one of these or another external partner, giving you the chance to do an internship with that partner and work collaboratively with them. So just a quick overview of the finances, and a lot of this I'll skip through quite quickly, but again, if you want the slides at the end, I'm more than happy to provide those because they've got some really useful links in them. You basically, if you get a studentship with us, then you get, as I said, your stipend, which is your grant for your living costs, and that's set by the UKRI. So we've got fixed terms and conditions provided by the UKRI. And the annual amount is there. We cover your fees. We give you a research training and support grant, which is to be spent on things like conferences and any equipment that you might need, anything really to support your research. The studentship is funded for 3.5 years, and we expect you to kind of be finished in that time, like written up and everything. And part of what makes a DTP different to other funding options is that we provide this cohort-based training. So that's kind of this amount at the bottom here, the £4,000 at the bottom. We use that money to provide training for everyone in the DTP. And that means that you have this network of other students that you can get support from, and it's another layer of support. You have when you do a PhD, you'll have your intimate academic group and your supervisor, and you'll have your school and your department. And the DTP is kind of another layer of people there who can help support you and provide training for you through your PhD, so that we're thinking about careers beyond the PhD as well. And then we've got, opportunities for placements, and we encourage you to forge new relationships with industry if you want to branch out as well. And hopefully you already know this if you're at this webinar, but we have, for the starting in October 2023, we have 24 studentships that are available. Because of a cap from the UKRI, from our funders, that means that we can only recruit a maximum of 7 international students, just as an FYI. And the deadline for the initial application is the 4th of January. As I've sort of mentioned, we have a website where you can search for all of our available projects. It's kind of like looking at a catalogue of projects. We unfortunately can only let you apply for one project within our Panorama DTP, but it is quite common for people to apply to multiple different DTPs. So you're more than welcome to do that. But if you want to apply for a project within our DTP, you have to sort of streamline for one particular project, and you can't apply for multiple. You can look for the projects online. As I mentioned before, case, if that's next year at the project title, it means that it has already got a link with industry, and you're expected to do a placement with them, and you get a little bit extra money to spend on training. And although it's not a formal part of the process, we highly recommend that you get in touch with the supervisor so that you can kind of suss out what they'd be like to work with and whether you'd be a really good fit for the project. Just to quickly go through the process, we have an online application stage, which, as I mentioned, the deadline is the 4th of January. You need your CV, personal statement, you need a couple of academic references, degree transcripts, and you don't need this quite at this stage, but if you are an international student, you will, if you are successfully awarded a place, need to provide English transcripts. So it's good to think about that early, although I admit you don't need that until you've been awarded a place and have to register at the university. We then go through a shortlisting process, and we have interviews. I'm not going to spend too long on this because I think our panelists would be best placed and be experts in answering what it's like to go through the interview process. But just to let everyone know, they would be scheduled for February next year. Very quickly go through what this year's interview process is going to be like. this is the same interview structure that we used for students who started in 2020. We had to halt it during the pandemic, but we're bringing it back for this year because it's a non-traditional format that's designed to be a bit fairer and a bit more inclusive. So rather than having one panel with lots and lots of panelists on it, we have instead 3 really short interviews with a pair of panelists on each. The idea being that one of those interviews is for your kind of more classic academic skills and your research and your projects, and the other 2 are on soft skills, so things that make a good PhD student but aren't necessarily academic, so things like organization and time management and all of those skills that maybe are not as obvious from a paper record. The idea being that with the 3 short interview structure, you can spread your risk out. So if you don't do great in one interview, you know that you've got another 2 that can help you out with your application. And for people who want to look up stuff after this webinar, the interviews are competency based, and you might find it helpful to use the STAR technique when answering the questions. Yeah, just to say as well, this webinar is primarily aimed at our underrepresented groups. As I've already said, I'm the Equality, Diversity, Inclusion Officer, and we're committed to improving our diversity in the Panorama DTP. So if you're not from these groups and you're at this webinar, that's fine, but the idea was to give a space for our underrepresented groups, which are the UK-based or home students who come from Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities, are disabled or from a disadvantaged socioeconomic background. We're aware that these groups are underrepresented in the DTP, and so as well as this webinar, we're offering additional support. So we've got 10% extra interview slots, which are reserved for anybody from these groups, and we'll be sending out a self-identification form shortly for anyone who wants to put themselves forward for that. And it'll be unknown, the panels won't know, the interview panels will not know that you have selected that option, just as an FYI. Also, until Christmas break and maybe a couple of days post-Christmas break, I'll be available for any one-to-one sessions for if applicants from these groups want to, run through their application with me. I can't look at any of the material itself, but if it's a great opportunity for anyone to ask questions if they're unsure about aspects of the application. I'm there, and you just need to email me and I'll book in a team slot with you. And we might be offering 2 scholarships, but this is in the pipeline and we're currently seeking university approval to secure those. So that is everything for me. Hopefully I've not spoken for too long. I'll stop sharing. And we'll get going with the panel. Okay, so I'm going to start with a question for everybody. How do you decide which PhD project is the right one for you? Has anybody got any thoughts on how you maybe went through the process of choosing your PhD project? Oh, that happened so quickly. I missed who was first. Who is it? We'll go with Jenny because you're top left on my screen.
Okay. So for me, I had already decided what my broad research interests were, and the way I kind of went about trying to find a good fit for a project was by thinking about the things that I was experienced in and was like had something in my resume relevant to, and then also thinking about what I would like to have, like kind of the experience that I wanted to gain. So that was kind of my approach, was just like half of it was, oh, here's how I would be a good fit. And then here's how I could benefit the project. And then here's how the project could benefit me in return.
Yeah, it's a really good point that it's not just about making sure that you're a good fit for the project. It's making sure that you're going to get something from doing that PhD as well. It's a two-way street, right? Who else had their hand up and it has any more comments? You're welcome to add to that. Who was it that had their hand up? Olufemi?
Yeah, so I think why trying to decide which project you want to apply for, you definitely would have been thinking of doing, before that you would have been thinking of, applying for different type of PhD beforehand. Because for me, before I stumbled on the advert, I kind of knew that I would want to explore food security, climate changes. So I kind of know the area I wanted. I want to understand how innovation processes occur in developing countries. And when I saw this advert, I quickly checked the website. But luckily for me, I got two projects that kind of suit my interest. So I had to decide between the two, which do I go for. The advisors on both projects were awesome. So I now had to dig deep, and I discovered that one was focused in Africa, which is where I actually want to see myself making huge impact in the future, while the other one was focusing on Europe. So then that kind of informed my decision, and I kind of went for the one that was focusing on Africa. Thank you.
And was that something that was explicitly written in the project description, or did you follow up with the supervisors to kind of find out?
No, it was explicitly like on the project. So I know that before, and because during my master's I did a project that was focused on the UK, but I actually wanted to do something related to Africa, but because of the 1-year master's, I never had time to to go back to Africa to do something. So I was left with no option to do something that was related to the UK. But I had it in my mind that during my PhD I would want to do something related to Africa, and that was just the distinct and why I was able to pick one out of those projects. Yeah.
Super. So yeah, you were mainly self-reflecting on the options that were available and making sure it aligned with what you wanted. Super. Amethyst, have you got something to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add something a little bit different in that I don't think it's just about the content of the project. I think you also need to think about the place you'll be living. So obviously all the different projects will be based at different universities and in different research groups. So you really, if you're maybe interested in a project, you really need to go to the university if you can, or at least speak to the supervisors and the research group. You need to experience what it's actually like, what kind of group do they have, because some research groups are a lot smaller than others at different universities, and you really want a group that's going to be supportive and have the kind of resources to help you with your PhD. So I think I agree with what's been said about the content of the project, but I think the environment is a really important consideration as well.
Thank you, Amethyst. Yeah, and that's such a good point. And for anybody who isn't able to arrange a visit to the department that they're thinking to do a PhD in, a good alternative might be just having a chat with not just the supervisor, but if you're able to have a chat with the current members of the research group, maybe by teams, then you could maybe get an idea of what the department's like in a more informal sense. Just asking the supervisor if that's an available option might be a good way of sussing that out if you can't attend for a tour in person. Eva, have you got something to add as well?
I just thought I kind of like add something to Amethyst's comment, because I like, obviously all those things are super important, but like the environment obviously is extremely important as well. But I feel personally that like you'd also should look into like if the place, like the city you're like moving to is actually like works for you. Like I personally probably kind of like knew already that like I probably wouldn't want to do like a PhD in London because it would be too big and everything. Like obviously it should also be kind of like the PhD shouldn't be like the only thing within your life while you're doing it. So you should like make sure that this is, you're like ending up in a place where you're happy and like you can focus on your PhD, but then also like in your free time can do things which make you happy. So I think I personally thought that was also very, very important for my decision eventually to come to Leeds.
Yeah, no, it's a great point really, is that your PhD is going to be this 3.5 year long thing, and that you have to make sure you maintain a work-life balance for your sanity. So that might be a good follow-up question, is how do you manage, what's your day-to-day life as a PhD student like?
Mine?
Anyone, but yeah, you can go first if you like.
I think I just made sure that I like keep up with like sports and everything, which I do really enjoy. So like obviously the benefit about Leeds is that you have like the Yorkshire Dales and the peaks close by. So if the outdoors is something which you enjoy and like clears your mind and everything, then I would definitely recommend coming to Leeds. Or like I assume like York must have really nice outdoors around as well. Don't really know anything about.
You have the North Yorkshire Moors, I guess, is quite close, and you know, York to Leeds is only half an hour on the train, and then York to Hull is maybe like an hour. Is that right, Ed? So they're all the universities are quite close together, and you have access to, yeah, as you're saying, all the outdoor parks.
So yeah, and then kind of like there are community centers where you could do like kind of like some like other education after you actually work there. For example, last semester I did like a pottery course every Wednesday after uni and stuff. So I feel like all those things kind of like added up to like my well-being during the PhD, and these things are like offered in Leeds. So I was like very, very grateful for that. But yeah, sure that there's like everybody has different interests, and you just need to make sure that they're kind of like available where you are.
You know, it's a great point. Make sure you've got hobbies outside of your life. Okay, we'll move on to maybe another question. How different are your PhD projects to what you've done previously? Whether you did a master's project or whether you did a BSc, how different are your current projects to your previous studies? Are they the same field? Is it a follow-on from a project you did before, or is it a complete sidestep? Thomas?
Yeah. So
I think it's a little, the internet is a little bit dodgy on your line.
My project was master's was based around atmospheric chemistry, so I've sort of. Is that going through now?
Yeah, I think that's better now. Must be a bandwidth problem.
Yeah. So yeah, my master's was in atmospheric chemistry, in the same department I'm in now. But I took 2 years out between. But now that I'm back, it's still a similar area in that it's atmospheric chemistry, but I've gone to a very different side of that. So I've gone from like VOCs to like methane emissions, which I'd never even thought of before. But I've got like transferable skills maybe to be able to apply to this project, even though it is incredibly different to whatever I've done before.
Yeah, no, thank you. And it's a good point that when we're selecting candidates, you know, if you want to do something different to what you've done before, that's completely fine. And really the transferable skills are the most important thing, not just your specific research experience. Has anybody else got a comment for that question about how closely aligned your previous work is with your current project? Or Jenny?
Yeah, so in my previous work, I've always been chasing questions about ecology and evolution. But I told you I'm studying seals now, but previously I was studying insects. So very, very different, very, very different study system, but the same broad questions. So I think there's definitely a lot to learn in the PhD because I don't know much about seals yet, but it's still like possible to kind of transfer those skills from the other project since it's similar topic, but just a very different study system.
So you've kind of kept like a thematic thread, but changed animal completely.
Exactly. Yeah.
Have you found that learning about
Mostly
mammals?
it's exciting. It's a little overwhelming. There's a lot of literature to go through. and I've noticed there's a lot that I just need to catch up on as far as specific, hard skills, like certain types of software, coding, things like that. So it's just like been a journey of navigating, trying to find workshops and courses and anything relevant so I can kind of catch up, but it's fun too.
Great, thank you. We've got a question in the Q&A function about the interview questions. So what did you do to prepare for the interviews? And if this could be answered maybe by people who started in 2020, but obviously the questions will be similar regardless what year you started. So if anybody has any advice on how to prepare for interviews and what sort of questions you guys got asked. Eva?
Hi. So you mentioned before the STAR technique, and I can remember that when I applied, I kind of thought initially, like I was kind of wondering what that is, or like why. I think I personally wanted to like come across like as natural as possible, and then like kind of like trying to prepare answers like through the STAR technique felt a bit like unnatural for me. But then I looked into it, and I know that like when I answer questions, I often go on tangents, and then I end up like somewhere completely different. So like trying to really use this technique, which basically means like S stands for situation, T for task, A for action, and R for result. And like you basically think of like a sentence per word, and then that's how you kind of like answer the questions, which also means that you kind of like use the like interview time efficiently, because otherwise you could just like waffle along, and then like you haven't really showed all the exciting bits you've done previously with the panelists, because you've just like talked about so many other things. So like I personally found it really useful actually to help me like stay on the line and like really like focus on what's important about my answer. So that definitely I can recommend looking into that.
It's good to know that you found it useful. I think I can do the same thing where I get excited and I waffle on, but but not making it so structured that you lose that kind of natural passion. Great. I missed who came up, so we'll just going left on my screen. Amethyst, have you got something to add?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things. So with the 3 interviews kind of structure, I think it's important to kind of read around your area, get kind of acquainted with even some basic news. So if you search for news articles about your subject, that can be really useful information in showing your interest in the interview. Also, I think it's really important to demonstrate that you are resilient. So you need to think about research challenges that have come up and how you've overcome them, and really think about what you've been stuck on before. And it can be anything. So any failures you've made in your masters or whatever, that can be used here. The only other thing I would say about the interviews is it's not just about them getting to know you. It's also about you getting to know them. So you should be asking questions to them as well about the university, about the program, all these kind of different things. Any questions you might have, take them with you to the interview, and then you can fire them back as well. And it shows that you kind of invested and you're interested as well.
Yeah, and it's also a really great opportunity for you to almost interview them in return. Just make sure that you're going to work well as colleagues and get along well. And I think it's a really great point that, it's not just you that's being under interview there. It's an opportunity to find out whether you're going to fit well in that project. Olufemi, did you have something else to add to that, or I saw your hand was up for a bit? Great.
I think they've covered all I want to say. So just prepare ahead. I think you need to do some research, especially with trying to know the group you're going to be joining. You could just pick 2 or 3 papers about written by maybe your primary advisor, so you familiarize yourself with what they do and also how it's aligned with your own research objectives. And I think you would also need to, while talking, you need to kind of own your project as if you've started, kind of implementing or doing the research already, so they could see that vibes in you, that you present yourself as if you know what you are doing, and then you also know the direction of which you want to kind of drive the PhD towards, because this is what your partner want to see. They want to see you owning your project. I also want to kind of see your idea on which of these directions you would want to kind of drive the project, and this I think would count for a successful interview. Thanks.
Great. So yeah, like showing initiative and showing that you can be an independent researcher from that early stage, which is a really great skill to show. And you don't have to show that just from like a master's project. If you don't have one, you can show that from work experience or anything where other aspects of your life where you've shown that kind of initiative. Ed, have you got something as well?
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate how important the preparation actually is. So a lot of the other panelists have mentioned some very good points about, sort of thinking about these potential questions that will be asked during your interviews, but actually really think about preparing answers for them. This is something that I found quite valuable. And, think about what they're looking for in response to those questions that they will ask, and prepare those answers for those questions. And something else I found quite valuable is if you've done interviews for PhDs or even jobs in the past, try and find out why you didn't get those positions, and sort of how you can work on getting those positions in the future, and use it as sort of like a self-improvement mechanism, so that you can keep on building until you finally get those positions that you're after.
Well, it's a great point, and it's like this. There's come up a couple of times about the idea of having to embrace the idea that you might fail in these things, and particularly research. I think the whole idea of it is that you don't know what you're going to be coming up against because it's new, and so the very nature of research means that you're going to have to encounter some form of failure at some point. Does anybody have any comments on that, about the transition from maybe like an undergraduate where everything is very there's very obvious metrics for success, and then transitioning to research mindset where it's a marathon, not a sprint? Anybody got any thoughts on managing that? Just to say, I came out of my PhD this time last year, so it's also fresh in my mind, and for me it was a very it was quite a difficult transition. The idea that at undergraduate you get the constant feedback about how well you're doing through essay marks or exams or whatever, and then research, you have this great expanse of time where you don't know exactly what's going to happen, and you need to impose your own structure on it. Amethyst?
Yeah, I thought this was a good point that I've not really heard many people talk about before. And I had this issue in my first year, especially first year of a PhD is really difficult. Most people have to come in and learn some new skills and even learn a whole new area. So it can be a really steep learning curve. And I struggled with that as well, kind of, am I doing well enough? Am I making enough progress? And in the end, I think it was just really useful for me to just reach out to my supervisor team and just ask, okay, how am I actually doing? Am I on track? And also, I think what's really nice is when you take your work to someone outside of the supervisor team and get their feedback on it, because it can usually be really positive and it can give you that kind of clear sight into what you're doing is really important. And I think sometimes you get stuck in that supervisor bubble and you don't realize actually how far you've come. I think it's good to have those checks every now and then.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. Making sure that you keep that relationship with your supervisor so that it's working how you want it to work. Some people will want weekly meetings to check things and set goals and move things forward, and other people will want to see their supervisor once a month because they want to just be left to it and do what they want to do. And since the supervisor-supervisee relationship is so intimate and varied, you just have to find what works for you and have those conversations. So it's a really good point, that, and making sure that you get external feedback as well by putting your work out there at conferences or doing a poster. It can be a real like confidence boost if you're not sure how things are going. Anybody got any more comments, or will we move on to another question? 2 seconds, I'm multitasking. Oh, someone's got a very specific question about how flexible PhD projects are with remote working. Has anybody got any experience, particularly in the last couple of years, of doing remote working as part of their project? Eva?
I thought I'd add that I don't live in Leeds at the moment, so like I kind of like only just come in 3 to 2 times a week, depending on the rail strikes, really. So that was really easy. I really like being in the office because that means I have all my like colleagues and friends around me, and I kind of like it's just easy to ask questions, and I personally feel like asking questions and like asking for help is like really important during a PhD as well. So it's like it adds a benefit to like be in the office, but it definitely is also possible, at least for me, at least at the University of Leeds, for like loads of people I've been talking to like work from home if that's what you need to do. Obviously there is you can't really like work from abroad because that would have like tax issues, because I'm in Austria, so like during the pandemic I spent a bit of time back home, and that was kind of like then an issue, but not an issue, but kind of like I needed to pay attention to like on like my holiday times and everything to like make it work and everything. But yeah, like you should definitely be in the UK to work remotely. But yeah, just thought I'd point that out.
No, that's great. I think it is very project dependent, the ability to remote work. At the panel on, we did another webinar on Friday, and we had some people who were able to work completely remotely because they were doing programming based projects, and then other people who were out doing field work at 3 a.m. So I think there's such a variety. Ed, have you got something to say there?
Yeah, exactly what you just said.
Okay,
really.
sorry, jumping the gun.
Yeah, it depends on the project, because yeah, my project's quite lab based, for example. So I'm in the lab and doing field work. But I think at the end of the day, if you're getting work done and you're being productive and your supervisor's happy and you're happy, it doesn't really matter where you work.
Yeah, I know that was certainly the message from my supervisor, was that he didn't really care what hours I worked as long as I was getting my PhD done, which meant that, you know, if you weren't feeling it that day for whatever reason, whether if you had a setback, you could take the rest of the day to reset your head and then come back at it afresh the next day, which I think is a really useful tip for anybody doing a PhD. We've got a question about references. So I was just wondering if anybody had any tips for getting academic references and who they'd choose and how they'd contact people to get their academic references for their application. Amethyst?
Yeah, so I think this one is, it's important to pick someone that you've worked with before. So maybe a supervisor for your dissertation on your master's or your BSc, either of those would be fine. Usually you need at least two references. So I would say they should be your primary option. So you can either just ask them in your next meeting or just send an email. But the second reference, I think it can either be, it's got to be someone else you know quite well. So it could be an academic advisor or someone like that. But what I found really useful was finding someone who led a module that was relevant to this project. So I reached out to them. I really enjoyed your module? Would you mind giving me a reference? And obviously it helps if you got a good grade in their module, but they should be able to vouch for you that you've got the skills that you'd need to undergo that project as well. But you just need to make sure that you actually know the person that you're reaching out to.
Yeah, great. And yeah, just bearing in mind to get them the requests in plenty of time so that it's not a last minute email sort of thing being that they've got to answer to. On a similar kind of note, how did people approach contacting the supervisors of the projects that they were applying to, and what sort of things did they ask them? What did you do when you were going to suss out your supervisor to be, essentially? Anybody got any thoughts on that, Ed?
Yeah, so I sent sort of quite a formal introduction to my supervisor, basically explaining who I was, why I'm interested in the project, what my background was, and then sort of asking questions a bit more about the nature of the project and what sort of elements I might be able to introduce to the project myself, sort of like how we were discussing the right PhD project for you has to be sort of mutually beneficial in terms of offering something to the candidate and something to the project. So we had sort of a little discussion about that. For example, I was really interested in doing some field work, which wasn't explicitly listed in the description of the project. So I'm like, is this possible? But yeah, I think it's important to build a bit of rapport before the interviews, just by contacting the supervisor and sort of let them know that you're a capable student and you're good for the job.
And did you speak to them through like a online call, or did you turn up and get shown around?
Yeah, it was initially an email, and then we eventually set up like a Teams meeting just to chat because it was easier.
Cool. And Olufemi, have you got something else to add to that as well?
Yeah, similar, just to follow up with what Ed just said. I think I started by emailing the primary supervisor, and then we kind of schedule the time for teleconferencing where we discuss more in depth how to frame the project. And you should just have this in mind that you would not be the only candidate reaching out to these supervisors. So there will be a lot of people reaching out to them. So you know to kind of articulate your strengths and let your supervisors kind of familiarize themselves with what they do and what your experiences are, what skill set you've got, and some of the skills you would like to brush up when you eventually kind of start this PhD. And for me, I had to also ask about my chances of getting this, because I'm a non-UK applicant, and I understand that it's going to be like I'm going to be competing for 7 slots or 6 as sort of then. So I had to also discuss this with him, and he gave me kind of tips and how to put up a very good application kind of, and I guess that would help as well. So it's good to reach out and discuss these things with the supervisor.
Yeah, and yeah, you're totally right. Unfortunately, because of the restrictions from our funders, we have a cap on the number of international students, and we just absolutely have to abide by that in order to get the funding. So it does mean that it's super, super competitive for international candidates, as you were saying. But I'm glad that you managed to get support from the supervisor, and that helped you. And it's a really good point to sort of say that rather than just sending any old email to the supervisors, they're academics and they're quite busy and they're going to get lots of inquiries. So just to make sure that you've structured that email with, as you say, your strengths, and to show that you've taken a bit of initiative, I think that can be really helpful, rather than just saying, hi, I'm interested in the project, end of. Great. So I just have another question about maybe for students who are a bit further on in their PhDs, because I think one thing that people tend to ask us quite a lot is whether getting a project on a DTP means that the project's fixed and they don't get to have their own input on the direction. I was just wondering whether anyone had any comments on if their project had changed direction a bit from the title that they initially applied to. I know that during COVID, projects had to change quite a lot. So I was just wondering if panelists could comment on the kind of flexibility within the project titles or ways that they've changed direction for their further research as they hit across any stumbling blocks. Amethyst?
Yeah, so this is a good point. I think most PhD projects probably veer off from the original research questions quite a bit. So yeah, mine, I got kind of stuck on one problem for a while. And I think the thing is, especially when you've got a case partner, so you've got links with industry or different universities, you have a diverse range of interests on the supervisor team, and people might want slightly different things from your PhD as well. So those can be quite big influences on what you end up doing. So for example, my work is about the boundary layer of tropical cyclones. So like I said, the lowest 2 kilometers or so. And I ended up changing the model for above the boundary layer. And I spent quite a few months on that. So that was quite a big divergence from my original title. I did manage in the end to link it back to the boundary layer, but I think it just shows how open it is to, sometimes you just have to follow the research leads that you've got and that are most interesting at the time. And you also have to think that you're starting this PhD and it'll probably start off quite slow. And literature is still being published throughout that whole time. You need to make sure that the questions you're answering haven't already been answered. And there might be new interesting questions that come up from the literature that you
Sorry, I think I dropped out there. I think my internet went a bit sketchy. Amethyst, did you manage to finish answering your question?
I think my internet is a bit sketchy too.
Yeah, it's unfortunate.
Has Catchy frozen for anyone else?
Oh, bugger. I can. Oh.
You're back.
Okay, I'm trying to change. Yeah, I think my internet cut out there for some reason. Hopefully everyone can hear me now. That's the perks of living in an old Edinburgh tenement building with thick walls. Sorry about that. Amethyst, did you manage to finish your question? Yeah.
I finished and then I got kicked out.
Sorry. Yeah, I think it's very frustrating. I have to say I have this problem because I have multiple people in the flat, and so it can really affect the bandwidth. But if it happens again, I'll try and get my video off. I've got another question for well, everyone, but it'll be particularly relevant to those that are finishing or coming up to the end. What is everyone thinking about their post-PhD careers? What's everybody thinking for their next steps? This might be a bit of a dreaded question, but I think in the DTP we try to embed careers as a thing all the way through. So just for people who aren't aware, the statistics of PhD graduates following all the way down the academic pipeline and getting to professor are very, very slim because of the way that the market is. It's it's not actually designed for a turnover. So it's important to recognise that PhD graduates have a lot of transferable skills, and that's why we have these links with industries, so that you can form connections with them, maybe do a placement and get some networking experience. And it means that you can take those skills to places like the Met Office or an NGO or a charity or a company and still, you know, have a really good career path after your doctorate. What's everyone thinking for their next steps once they graduate? Anybody got any ideas? Academic, non-academic, not sure? Keeping options open? Or has anybody got any experience of doing internships with their case partners? Ed?
Yeah, as you said, it's a bit of a dreaded question.
I know it's a tough one, sorry.
Yeah, it's definitely, it's something I've thought about. So as a reminder, I'm just going into my second year now. It's something I'm thinking about as I'm doing my PhD. I'm thinking, what skills can I acquire that's, you know, going to be applicable to stuff other than just a postdoc, which is, you know, some other sort of research project. So yeah, all I'll say is it's stuff I'm thinking about, but it's not something I've planned for what I'll do after yet.
No, I think it's fair enough to keep it fairly open, but you're totally right to think about getting those skills early on that would make a good CV. Like, one of my regrets from my PhD is that I didn't learn any programming. I think that would be really, really great. I was a physical chemist in my background, and we used programs to run simulations, but I never learned how to actually code those programs myself, and it's something that I'm trying to fill in at the moment. Has anybody else got any thoughts on the kind of work experience side of things, whether that's like internships or careers, thoughts, or anything like that? I do know it's a tough question. I hated being asked about it when I was doing my PhD. And I just think, Amethyst, you've got something.
Yeah, I don't want to take over anyone else, but if no one else has anything to say, I'll just say, so as my case partner is the Met Office, I've spent some time there, which has been really useful in terms of just being able to have a seat next to my supervisor and just ask things constantly. I don't think they got much other work done while I was there, but I made a lot of progress. So obviously I'm a bit later on in my PhD than some people here. So I've thought about what I want to do afterwards, and I'll probably look for, my best option would be to do an international postdoc and then probably work for a meteorological organization like the Met Office. So it's just something that it's kind of a secure job that you can stay on and retire from. But yeah, I would like to get that international experience, but at the end of the day, you've just got to see what's available when you finish.
Yeah, it's a good point that you can, you can sort of switch from an academic pathway to a non-academic pathway, and that can be a completely valid part of your plan. I did like a short-term postdoc after I finished my PhD to test the academic waters, and it's totally fine to transition between the two. And I think that it's a really valid point that you don't have to be gunning for going all the way down the academic pipeline. You can think about getting some industry experience and maybe even coming back later on if that's what suits you. Eva?
I perfectly agree with that. Like, as in, like, also with what Amethyst said, it's like, I guess, like, you would need to look at the end of your PhD what options are there, and I'm like perfectly aware that like a postdoc might not always be the option, just because there are not that many like positions available. So like, even if that's what you'd be keen to do, like, you obviously need to look into the other direction. So I think, so like, I personally use radar satellite data to look at volcanoes, but like loads of my day-to-day PhD work is like just like processing satellite data. So like it could be a different feature I'm looking at. It doesn't need to be a volcano. So like from the beginning onwards, I was always very aware that like I guess that's a very transferable skill, and then like I could just like go to industry afterwards and like use it for something else, as in grant defamation for any kind of reason, sort of. So that was like very aware for me, but like obviously I'm very much looking for like what postdoc opportunities there are afterwards, because I'm like very interested in volcanoes, and I guess that would be the way to keep on going, looking at them.
Great. I'm just going to ask a kind of free-for-all sort of question. If you had to give one tip to applicants, a bit of advice on how to make your application stand out, what would you say? What was the one thing that, or one piece of advice someone gave you that really helped you when you were going through your PhD application or interview process? Olufemi?
Okay, so I think one thing that would stand out is kind of going to the website, reading the instructions, and following them to the latter. I guess that would make a very good application. For instance, you need to check out your CV, update them if need be, and check out if you need what you English requirements in case of visa application. Understand the area of academic transcripts, references, get them in handy as soon as possible, and your personal statement as well, polish that, put in your interest in your experiences, how the project suits you, and those are basic things you could flesh out from the website. So just go into the website and read through thoroughly and follow that to latter. I think this is a good idea to start to have a good application package.
It's a really great point, because we do make a lot of information available on our website. So we have a projects page where you can browse all the projects. There's a how to apply page, which takes you through the different steps of the application. We've had these webinars to kind of supplement that, and I'm happy to, as I say, to send out slides and the recording if anybody's interested in that. I've also made up a FAQs page for answers to frequently asked questions to do with the application process, or kind of getting a bit of advice on how to choose your project, that kind of thing. So you've made a really, really good point that there are resources out there to help applicants with the process. We're not trying to make it a scary black box kind of thing. We do have support there for you. Ed, I think you were next.
Yeah, really great points by Olufemi and Katja there. And my sort of general piece of advice, which covers everything you guys have just said, is just to really put time into preparation. So, doing that research on the website, what's needed from you, what's your subject area, what questions are they going to ask you? Really put some dedicated time into preparing for your application and for the interview. I think that's really what helped me with this application, as opposed to some of my other applications, is that, sort of skimmed over some stuff as like, yeah, that will do. But, the Panorama DTP project came up, and I spent a bit more time trying to prepare everything. Right, gonna get it this time, and it paid off. So that's my advice.
I'm glad that was helpful, and yeah, glad you persevered as well. It's difficult, I think, as we sort of covered, when you've gone through quite a rigid education system, to bounce back when you get into the world of research, or having to go through job applications and interviews. So it's a good transferable skill to learn. Jenny, have you got something as well?
Oh, just to reiterate what the rest of you guys have said, just absolutely tailor your application and CV to the project description as best as you possibly can. Put the skills in that they're looking for, like write them out in your CV right at the beginning, and then throughout your application and revert, like keep referencing them, go back to them, loop back around. And then for me, like also international student, for the interview, I practiced with my supervisor who like, I asked like him what he thought they would want to know, like what he thought they would ask. He sent me a list of questions he thought they might ask, and we practiced and just absolutely, like Ed was saying, just prepare, and make yourself look like you're the best possible fit for that project.
Super. It seems, yeah, one thing that seems to be a theme through those answers is the idea that you've got to do a bit of research as part of your application. And I think it's a really good point, because supervisors and the interview panelists, they're basically looking for someone who's going to be a good fit for a research project. So showing that you can do even the research that's needed to apply, you know, that's a really important step. I think that's been covered by everyone here, that if you can take a little bit of initiative with your research for your actual application, that's a really, really good way of showing that you're going to be a good PhD project researcher as well. We've talked a lot about different skills that you need, and to, you know, putting them in your CVs and all that sort of stuff. Has anybody got any, you know, if you had to pick the top skill that isn't, you know, research focused, the kind of top soft skill that makes a good PhD student, what would you guys say? What do you think is the most important thing to balance? Ed?
Organization for sure. So I'm religious with my to-do lists at the moment, so I'll get my to-do lists, and you know, often you'll find you remove one thing and you add 3 more, but the to-do list gets you, and the organization is I think is a very important skill.
Yeah, because you, as we've sort of mentioned, you have a huge horizon of time to fill, and it's important to break everything down into manageable chunks and manageable steps, so that it doesn't get overwhelming, and so that you can just tackle the things that you're able to tackle that day. Eva?
I would say asking for help, as in like jumping over your shadow and like make yourself aware that you don't need to solve everything on your own, because I feel like as a starting a PhD, that can often seem like that. Like you feel like now that you've started this, you kind of like need to figure this all out yourself, and like you need to know all of this and everything, but that's not the case. I feel like you really should like don't let yourself drive into get into rabbit holes just because that just it's not really productive or anything. Just really ask your peers, ask your colleagues, just seek help when you need it. And I personally struggled with that at the beginning, so I thought I'd mention that because maybe there are other people similar to me there. So yeah, I think that's important.
I think it's a really, really great point. You do have these different support structures, whether that's at your university or in your specific department, or within your research group, or your family or your friends, or the DTP itself. There's different layers of support for different problems that you might face, and absolutely reaching out for a bit of help when you need it, whether that's practical help or emotional support. I think it's a really important thing to make sure you keep your lifelines there, since, as Ed's mentioned, you're doing a lot of managing your own time, and so you have to manage your own well-being and priorities, and not just the PhD project priorities. Amethyst?
Yeah, I think one really important thing which is often overlooked is the ability to focus really intently. So I think this is a big problem which a lot of people don't really acknowledge, in that you could sit down to do work and then you'll end up spending an hour on emails, or you'll just be scrolling through your phone the whole time. And I think it's really important to learn how to get into this kind of flow state kind of mind. And one thing that really helped me with that was a book called Deep Work by Cal Newport. And it's basically about creating a structure and an environment that allows you to focus on your work, which ultimately is where the most of your progress will be made. Because at the end of the day, you've got to think that a PhD is not about learning what someone else has already said. It's about creating new knowledge. And to create new knowledge, you really have to be thinking deeply about your topic and exploring different avenues. So yeah, that would be my top thing. I didn't learn that for a few months into my PhD, but once I got a handle on it, I made a lot of progress.
I've never heard of that book. I'll have to look it up, because I completely agree with you. And I think in the modern world, it's so easy to be distracted with constant pinging, whether that's Teams or email or your social media. And, you know, phones are starting to be set up so that you can set focus mode and, you know, work mode and things like that. But it's important to make sure that you've got your head ready as well, to do that. And you're completely right. I think what a lot of people really forget is that when you're doing research, you are creating new knowledge, and that is a really special thing. Not many people can say that they've made something new out of nothing. And so it's, you know, it's hard to do. It's by nature, it's a difficult thing to do, but it can be really rewarding, especially when it goes well. Yeah, we don't have any more questions in the Q&A, I don't think. I think everything's been covered. I suppose one final question that I can think of is, what made you choose the Panorama DTP? I would take it that I presume that the panelists would have maybe applied to other DTPs or other PhD projects and wouldn't have just applied for the one. So what made you choose to apply to or accept the position from the Panorama DTP? What made it? Ed?
Yeah, so we spoke a little bit before about sort of what makes the best PhD project for you. And this was simply a case of this was the best PhD project for me. So those sort of subject specific skills matched up nicely. The funding was a large part. I really wanted a project that had, you know, as a studentship or a scholarship, so that I would have sort of, it would take some of the weight off the financial side of it, so I could focus entirely on my studies. So that's the main determining factors for the Panorama DTP for me.
No, it's a good point. And I realized one thing I should have maybe mentioned earlier is that when you're doing your DTP PhD, you are allowed to work part-time to supplement your income, but you can't work a full-time job alongside. Again, that's a rule set by our funders. We can't let people, because it's meant to be the equivalent of a full-time job, a PhD. So while you can do teaching and demonstrating and casual work in the university, and you can do a part-time job outside of that, you can't do a full-time job alongside. Olufemi, I saw you had your hand up briefly. Is there anything that you wanted to say, or?
I actually just want to reiterate about, you know, the funding that is available, as well as, you know, the support systems available for Panorama DTP, as you will be working as a cohort, and like you will not be left lonely. You would have your mates. You would enjoy frequent social gatherings, and yeah, so it's come with a lot of packages, and yeah, that was why I preferred the DTP. Great,
thank you. And Eva?
I think one of the, like, as well as Olufemi just mentioned, I really liked the ideas, the cohorts. Like as I mentioned before, I'm from Austria, and like if you do a PhD there, that's not really how it works. It's kind of like you're kind of like employed by the university, and like you might be like 1 out of 3 PhDs in the department or something. So like I really like the idea of like a whole cohort starting at the beginning. You all like face the same struggles at the beginning. You can then like ask each other for help if that's needed, despite the fact that other people like researching completely different topics and have different supervisors and everything. But I also feel like the DTP really has a good support network. There is like maternity leave funding, for example. There's like, if you have like mental health struggles, like they will support you. So I personally thought all those things are really important, because it's just like whatever whatever you come across in life, they will support you, sort of. And I kind of thought that made me kind of like assured that I'll have good experience doing it, sort of.
it's a really good point, and I feel like I should have mentioned earlier that, yeah, because we're funded by NERC through the UKRI, we have all of our terms and conditions set. So that includes sick pay, that includes compassionate leave, as you said, that includes maternity leave. It's worth just reading through all those terms and conditions online. If you just look at the UKRI terms and conditions for PhD students, then you can find them to get more of the detail on that. But I know that that can, you know, that's not always guaranteed when you take a university scholarship. You have to be very careful if you're choosing that to see what they offer in comparison, and that support net can be really, really beneficial. And just one other comment on that, which is that recently the stipend rate for the UKRI went up 10% as a response to the cost of living crisis, and we have to follow the UKRI rate. It's pegged to that. So you know, again, that can vary. Universities don't necessarily have to do that if they're offering their own separate scholarships, but DTPs have that structure, which is really, really helpful. We've got about 10 minutes left, so I just want to, if anyone has any last questions, just get them in the Q&A function and we'll get to them. I just want to say, I'll repost the link to the feedback form. It's super, super quick. It literally takes like 2 minutes, and it gives you guys the option as attendees to sign up to a mailing list where I can keep your contact details and send you any other support for prospective applicants, including like if you want to just get in touch with me to ask any follow-up questions. I know that, as always, as soon as you finish something like this, you go, oh, why didn't I ask that? So people are welcome to get in touch with me if they'd like. If they fill in this form, then if you just fill in that form, then I'll have your email address on a separate list, and that would be super. And I can, send the slides if that would be helpful as well. Oh, I think I sent that to the, sorry, my multitasking is not going so great today. That's a Monday for you. That's the link to the feedback form there. And just, thank you everybody for coming, and thank you to, we've got one final last question, which is, what would one say is the essence of a PhD? So quite a metaphorical last question there. If anybody has any ideas of how would you distill a PhD into one kind of concept or idea, or what it means to you? Anybody got any ideas? I know for me it was, this is maybe a left field kind of answer, but I felt that it's a journey of like self-reflection as much as it is about carving out new knowledge for your project. It was the thing that took me by surprise anyway, is I did a lot of learning about myself as well as learning about the field that I was studying. I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts on that, but it's all about learning for me anyway. But if nobody has any other final questions, then we can maybe wrap up. If everyone, just last thing, if you could please fill in that feedback form. I'd really, really appreciate the feedback on the webinar today. Oh, and the other thing I was trying to remember to say is I'm open for emails about applications and anything else for the rest of the week, and then for a couple of days before the application deadline in January, just to bear in mind for everyone applying that universities have building closure days over Christmas and people are much less available to get in touch. So I'm sorry that this is a bit later on in the application timeline. It was just logistical issues that meant I couldn't offer this earlier, but just if everyone could get their applications in or get any advice that they want early, that would be great. So if nobody has any final questions, then I think we'll wrap it up. Thank you ever so much for all the panelists for donating your time to this. Thank you again to Sebastian and Nigel, who've been busy in the background answering everyone's questions. And thanks again. Have a lovely rest of your day. Cheers.
Thanks, good.